Guys, welcome to Amity Tracks. When we kind of went on our hiatus on this channel, we've been going for a while. We took about a year off. One of the main reasons I wanted to come back, other than it's just a lot of fun, is I felt there was some unfinished business. I felt there were certain artists that I didn't get to really cover, yet before, when we kind of stopped making videos. And Jeff Beck is definitely one of them. I made a tribute video when he passed in early 2023, but I haven't really made a video talking about Jeff Beck as the artist, ranking his albums, doing what we do. So let's get into that. Let's do that. I want to do several things in this video. I do want to make the case. I want to argue that, at least in my opinion, Jeff Beck was the greatest electric guitarist in rock. Not the most influential or important. Both of those, I think, belong to Jimi Hendrix. Yeah, not the fastest player. There are faster players. Not the most technical player. There's a lot of players have a lot more technique than Jeff Beck. But I do think that he was the greatest. And some of it's kind of intangible. But I want to try and explain a little bit why that is. I also want to give a quick overview of his discography because it's a difficult discography. It's not an easy one to get into. So I want to do that. And then, what we always like to do here, right? I want to rank the albums, rank the studio albums. So hopefully part of this is kind of educational, sort of understanding Jeff Beck's greatness. Because, Jeff Beck is one of those, it's a name that a lot of people know, whispered in hushed tones, Jeff Beck. But, a lot of people aren't really familiar with the music. Not like, say, an Eric Clapton or a Jimmy Page or Hendrix and all these others. And so I want to rectify that. I kind of want to get into it and give you reasons to really dig into the discography. If you already know and love Jeff Beck, you know how to fast forward. You can get straight to the ranking if you want to do that. So, I want to start by actually suggesting a video by Rick Beato. Most of you guys know Beato, but he has a video called "Why Jeff Beck is Uncopyable." And it's a great video. He really gets a lot more into the technical stuff than I can about why Jeff Beck is so uncopyable, because he makes this great point, and I totally agree with that. Beck was admired. He's like a guitarist's guitarist, admired by all. If you see these interviews with all these great classic rock guitar players, invariably, when they're asked, who are the greats, I mean, Jeff Beck is the man, from Santana to whoever. I've heard it over and over again. Jeff Beck. Is Jeff Beck all that influential, though? What's interesting about what Rick Beato argues is not necessarily because he is so uncopyable. It's almost like Jimi Hendrix. You can kind of learn what he's doing with his fingers. You can study the equipment he's using, but there are certain things that to this day people can't replicate. That Hendrix was doing, the sounds he was getting. Jeff Beck is a very similar case. He really is uncopyable. So therefore, he has more an inspiration to a lot of people and less a direct influence. Because a lot of people, with great players like Eddie Van Halen or Stevie Ray Vaughan, with a lot of practice, years and years of practice, you can approximate what they're doing. You can learn what those guys have done. You might not have the exact the spark of magic, but you can approximate it. But with Jeff, there's a whole lifetime trying to figure it out. You can figure out what the fingers are doing, but you're not going to get those sounds. And I kind of want to talk about that a little bit. And so, in that Beato video, he talks about he saw Jeff play live a couple of years before he died. It was a fairly recent video, and he got to go backstage and meet Jeff Beck. Beato knows a lot of people, so he was able to go kind of watch the sound check and everything. He said it was really cool to meet Jeff briefly, but what he was really excited about is he wanted to go check out Jeff's setup. Because he was expecting this bank of complex pedals and everything and effects. Well, what really surprised him was it was very simple. There's some amps, a couple of basic pedals, But yeah, but that sound, it's all comes out of sort of how Jeff Beck handles the guitar. The you know the A lot of people focus on this hand, right, the left hand, but a lot of Jeff Beck's magic was in the right hand. Sort of how he played down here. Not as much. I mean, he was fast. He could do his amazing runs, all that stuff. But it was the right hand where the magic was, because at some point in the '80s, he stopped using a pick, and from then on till the end, he used his fingers. And there's something about flesh on the string, on these metal strings, that's different, different than the pick. He would pick with his thumb, and then he'd use these fingers, all kinds of different flourishes, and it's fascinating stuff. And and it was a different sound. I know there are other people who play, finger pick, Mark Knopfler and Lindsey Buckingham, two guitarists I greatly admire as well. But but Jeff got a whole kind of different tone, and it was this control that he had, because it wasn't just tone; it was sort of microtones. I remember I've saw him live a couple times. One time I was fortunate enough to be very close, right up front, just right there. And he would play with a slide occasionally, and of course, most people play with the slide up here, right? Well, Jeff, he would put the slide up here, right above the pickups, and the precision you need. We're talking microtones here, not just tones. The precision you need. I mean, it was jaw dropping. I mean, it was astounding. And so it's just, part of it is kind of the innovations, the sonic innovations, the control and the tone, which was, as Rick Beato said, uncopyable. And just this creative mind. A lot of people, when they describe Jeff Beck's playing, like to reference like a vocal quality. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of fans much prefer him just doing instrumental stuff, because an actual singer will often get in the way. I mean, it's his guitar that is the voice. And I think one of the really important things is he kept innovating. He kept innovating to the end. Jeff Beck, unlike any of these other great guitar players of his generation that I can think of, Clapton, Page, whatever, anyone who's still alive, in the 21st century, when like Beck was, if anything, Jeff Beck was actually hitting creative peaks and being more daring and innovative in the last 25 years of his life than he was even, back in the '60s and '70s. I mean, it's the work he was doing in the 21st century. When you have Eric Clapton just slavishly doing the blues stuff, and you know, a lot of these guys are retired, and Jimmy Page just sort of curating the Led Zeppelin legacy. Jeff Beck was always pushing forward, always moving forward. And and you might kind of ask the question, why? I mean, everyone's heard the name, if you're into music, Jeff, the name of Jeff Beck. But why aren't people as familiar with his work as, say, the Jimmy Pages and the Jimi Hendrixes and everybody else? I think there's several reasons. One, his music does take more sort of focused attention. His greatness is there. It's not as obvious as, say, an Eddie Van Halen or Stevie Ray Vaughan, like I mentioned earlier. Those guys were brilliant, but their brilliance was sort of more obvious. You could pick up on it like that. With Jeff Beck, it really takes more listening, kind of more focus to really get why it's so great. Uh, just real quick, if you want one song, to really pick up where like every second is just perfectly chosen, tones, microtones, just playing "Goodbye Pork Pie Hat," off of Wired. All right, just if you're not familiar with his music at all, maybe pause this and no, actually finish this video, then go listen to that song. Then go listen to that song, and you'll kind of hear what I'm saying. But again, it's got to be totally focused, and your jaw will drop. I promise you. But again, kind of looking into why he isn't so familiar. Well, I think part of it is he really hadn't had a lot of hits. His uh, there's not like a greatest hits you can go by. Now there's some compilations. There's two major ones. There's this 3 disc set Beckology, which I think totally misses the mark. Yeah, I mean, I there's some great stuff on here, but his whole fusion era I think is not represented well at all on here. There's a single disc that is Best of Jeff Beck or Best of Beck, which actually is not a terrible single disc sampler, but it kind of necessarily it's real chaotic and all over the place. Uh, and it stops before arguably some of his most innovative work came later. Because it was put out in the '90s, and he really the 21st century is really important actually. So there's not a great comp you can get. I think there needs to be a great comprehensive one, but there's not one out there yet. He doesn't have a lot of hits that are just kind of easy entryways into his music, like a Led Zeppelin or whatever. Yeah, and it some of it, his own doing. His discography is not really consistent. His he I was looking through it, and I don't think there's any more than 2 records in a row where he keeps the same personnel. He was always changing personnel. He would go down these really interesting roads and then stop, and then you wouldn't hear from him for 5 years, and then he reemerges in a totally different genre, and so his discography is pretty scattered, and he kind of jumping around a bit. He could be a prickly personality. He reminded me a lot of Neil Young, right? Where if he wasn't digging a situation, he'd split just really quick. He didn't really love touring either. Interesting, until the 21st century. The last 25 years of his life, he toured way more than he ever did before. And so, yeah, that's part of it too. It's hard to catch him live before the 21st century. So, yeah, I think there's a lot of different reasons why he hadn't caught on, and it is a more complex kind of playing to really appreciate what he's doing. So, what I want to do here is I want to very briefly, before I give you the ranking, very briefly, I want to kind of give you a quick overview of his career, because I think the ranking will make a lot more sense if you sort of understand his release history, with his albums. So, very briefly, I'll try to make it brief. He first gained a lot of attention as a guitar player for the Yardbirds, right? And so, you guys probably know the history of the Yardbirds. Three British guitar titans came out of the Yardbirds: Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Jimmy Page, right? Eric Clapton was the first guitar player. He got all his panties in a bind when they decided they wanted to leave just the straight blues and you know go explore more adventurous territory. And so Clapton split. Jeff Beck comes in, takes his place. Jeff Beck, that period of the Yardbirds, I mean, I've got, this is a greatest hits, the Yardbirds, which is great. Um, this is fantastic. This is a very comprehensive 2 CD. It's like over 50 songs on here, set that beautifully covers the Clapton era, the Beck era, the Page era, and it's called Yardbirds Ultimate. But and it's really Jeff Beck's tenure at the Yardbirds, which to me is the most interesting, the most innovative, the most creative. And there's a brief period where he and Jimmy Page were actually in the group at the same time. That would have been amazing to see. But so Jeff could be a kind of a prickly personality, a difficult personality. And I don't remember all the details, but he was basically booted from the Yardbirds. And Jimmy Page took over. One of probably my favorite speech ever at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was when the Yardbirds were being inducted, and all the former members are up there. The 3 guitarists are up there, and it's Jeff's turn at the podium, and he says, I really should be honored to be inducted, you know, in the Hall of Fame with the Yardbirds and all that, but I'm not, because these guys kicked me out of the band. So F you guys, although he used the full word. I mean, it was obviously, it was a joke, but there's a little edge to it. It was funny. I mean, it got a lot of laughs. It was great. But anyway, Jeff's kicked out. And of course, Jimmy Page takes over, and then eventually the Yardbirds sort of morph into the new Yardbirds, and then becomes Led Zeppelin, right? That whole story. So Jeff, he puts out a few kind of interesting singles, and then he forms his first group, the Jeff Beck Group. And the Jeff Beck Group, at least the first version of the Beck Group, puts out these two records, Truth in 1968 and Beckola in 1969. And this is probably his most celebrated lineup, right? You know, you have Jeff Beck, Ron Wood on bass. You've got, let's see, Nicky Hopkins on piano. They did switch out drummers. But of course, most notably, this young singer by the name of Rod Stewart makes his big time debut. This is the heaviest Rod Stewart ever got, by the way, was on these Jeff Beck Group albums. Well, there's a car accident. Jeff is sidelined. There's dissension in the group. They miss out on their supposed. They were supposed to actually be one of the big groups in Woodstock. They miss out on that. Ron Wood and Rod Stewart go off. The Faces, and Rod goes off. Of course, on his solo career. So he puts together the Jeff Beck Group, but a whole different lineup. What I call Jeff Beck Group Mach 2. They put out these two albums, and kind of the heavy blues rock is still kind of there, but there's a jazzy element here, with some of the new players in here. But anyway, that disintegrates. He briefly is part of this power trio, Beck, Bogert, and Apiece. It's Tim Bogert and Carmine Apiece. They put out this one record and then a live record, and then that's done. I'm not putting this in the rankings. It's kind of its own thing. And honestly, I'm not a big fan of it. I think it's kind of, I don't know. I'm not a big fan of it. Then, of course, you have two landmark albums with Blow by Blow and Wired. See where these are in the rankings. These are jazz fusion, fully instrumental, and every bit as important in my view as those Miles Davis fusion albums, the John McLaughlin, Return to Forever, all that stuff. These two records are right up there. We'll talk about them in the rankings, of course. He puts out this live album with the Jan Hammer group. Jan Hammer actually plays a pretty big role on Wired. This is a little excessive with the band, but there's some killer playing on here. Again, in our rankings, we're just doing studio albums, and now this is almost considered just part of his regular discography. But there's that, and then it's very sporadic, from there, there and back, which is kind of this bridge between the fusion and into the 80s. He takes a shot at 80s mainstream, puts out this very innovative, kind of fascinating record. The 90s are really scattershot with this, and then Frankie's House soundtrack. And you could be forgiven to think that he was just kind of done and washed up, but then he puts out this trio of kind of electronica records that just totally revitalizes his career. You'll see what I think of these. And then really huge success kind of, the rest of the way until his death. He's playing shows weeks before his death. Just kind of more releases in the night, in the 2000s, Emotion Commotion, Loud Hailer, his final record, a duet album with Johnny Depp. Yeah, you heard that right. We'll talk about that in the rankings. And he only released that one live album, all the way into the 2000s. But then in the 21st century, all kinds of live releases, the official bootleg, live at the BB King Blues Club. You've got live in Tokyo, live at the Grammy Museum, Live Plus, Rock and Roll Party honoring Les Paul. If you want, to me, the best definitive live album, and I'll just talk about it here because it's not in the rankings since I'm not doing live albums, would definitely be this, right? Jeff Beck performing this week live at Ronnie Scott's, I think released 2008. This is a kind of a deluxe 3-record edition, but you can find it on double album. This, just firing on all cylinders. He has an absolutely astounding band with him. And I mean, if you want to get the Jeff Beck live experience, here you go. And this is, of course, where you can get, I think a definitive version of A Day in the Life, that beautiful instrumental version he does of the Beatles classic. It sort of became a signature tune of his for the last 20, 30 years of his performing life. And there's a great version of that on here. But this whole thing is brilliant, 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 brilliant. All right. So let's now do the rankings. And with the magic of editing, I'm going to kind of reorder these, but for you, it'll just be a split second. So let's get into it. The albums are now in the correct order. All right. Coming in at number 17, as you might have surmised by the tone when I was introducing it, I do have 1985's Flash. Uh, 2 stars. Now, this is the songs on here are terrible, I think. I mean, 0 to 1 star. The only thing that elevates it to the 2 stars, is of course Jeff's playing, but this was an ill-conceived attempt to bring Jeff into the mainstream, produced by Nile Rodgers. You got to look. Nile Rodgers just come off producing Madonna and David Bowie's Let's Dance, and so he's sort of this expert in mainstream success, and I think it's a disaster. Now, there's a couple instrumentals on here, but this vocalists, Jimmy Hall, who's a great singer, not his fault. It's just the songs are bad. Uh, Jeff himself actually sings 1 or 2 songs on here, which is kind of funny. But there is one, I think, great standout song, and that's of course his one-off reunion with Rod Stewart. They do this cover of "People Get Ready," which was kind of a decent hit. I remember seeing the video on MTV a lot at the time. Beautiful version, beautiful version. I mean, there's just something about Jeff and Rod when they're together. It kind of works. Too bad they couldn't have done more together than they did. It gave Rod some grit, much needed grit. But anyway, but other than that, yeah, I mean, this is just a lot of synths, a lot of programming. Just right in the middle of the '80s, trying to put Jeff in that sort of '80s hard rock mainstream. I ain't buying it. All right. And it didn't work either. He didn't bust through the mainstream. Number 16 is 18, as in the title of the album is 18. And this is his final record, this duet album with Johnny Depp. That's right, Johnny Depp. And it's interesting. It's interesting. Yeah, I give it 2 stars. I maybe it's not as big of a train wreck as you might think. But I think the focus is definitely more on Johnny than Jeff. Jeff gets a couple instrumentals, beautiful instrumental version of the Beach Boys' "Caroline No." That's gorgeous. But a lot of this is it seems to be a way for Johnny Depp to kind of exercise some of his demons. I mean, and some of the vocals are sort of beyond his reach. He's trying to sing John Lennon's "Isolation," Marvin Gaye's "What's Going On," Smokey Robinson and the Miracles' "Ooh Baby Baby." Uh, yeah, more in his wheelhouse, and actually, I think a real good cover is "Venus in Furs," the Velvet Underground song. That kind of works more with Johnny's vocals. And there's some original songs on here, some originals. I think "Sad Mother Effin' Parade," although the title spells it out, and he repeats the word over and over again in the song. Again, it really is Johnny sort of confronting some of his own demons in there. I think the best song on here, to be fair, the best song on here does really belong to Johnny Depp more than Jeff. And this is a song for Miss Hedy Lamarr. It's actually, I think, a really good song, but this is more interesting than something that I really want to listen to over and over again. But apparently these guys are obviously really hit it off. They were good buddies. They were touring. Who knows? Maybe they would have kept doing stuff had Jeff not died unexpectedly. All right, number 15. I don't need to spend a lot of time on. 1993, "Crazy Legs." This is Jeff Beck and the Big Town Playboys. This was a tribute to Gene Vincent, but really Gene Vincent's guitarist, Cliff Gallup. You got 18 tracks here of Jeff basically playing exactly like Cliff Gallup, and he had a singer who tries to sound just like Gene Vincent. And I mean, I guess it's fun. Kind of not why I'm listening to Jeff Beck though, for him just to copy Gene Vincent or Cliff Gallup's guitar playing. It's admirable. He does an admirable job, but yeah, probably the most pointless record in his whole discography there. All right, number 14, I can say 2 stars as well. I can say really quick this the year before Crazy Legs. I just have a burned copy of this. This is a soundtrack he did, a film, TV film. I think it's a film. I don't know. I never saw it. Called Frankie's House. Now you might think Jeff Beck would actually be a great choice for a soundtrack, because a lot of his music is moody, instrumental, and there's some cool stuff on here. But it's just a lot of these tracks are really, they're a minute and a half, clearly connected to a scene or something. So a lot of these songs are not like kind of full songs, and it's just, I mean, it's kind of cool to listen to, I guess, but it doesn't really stick with you. Doesn't really stick with you. All right, number 13, moving into the 3-star territory, is from 2016, Loud Hailer. Now this one's interesting. Now this one I really did not like when it came out, but honestly, kind of re-listening to a lot of this stuff in preparation for this video, I kind of come around on it. Now, why do I still have it kind of low? That's because so he has a vocalist. On this record, there's Jeff, and he works with the singer called Rosie Bones, and then her partner in her other band, Carmen Van. It starts with a V. I can't draw a blank on the name, but basically these two kind of work together musically in a band, and I don't know. Jeff found them, really liked them, asking them to be a part of this record. You know, uh, One, I do prefer instrumental Jeff Beck versus Jeff Beck with vocalists. Now, this is a knock, not a knock on Rosie Bones. She is actually a very interesting artist. She's got a very interesting vocal style. She's an interesting songwriter, like lyrically. A lot of these songs are very pointed, kind of politically. Very interesting lyrics. But this is titled a Jeff Beck album, and it almost, to me, sounds like a Rosie Bones album with like special guest Jeff Beck playing some guitar on it. Jeff does get, I think, a couple, like two instrumentals. Pull It kicks butt. It's pretty awesome. But I mean, no, this is featuring Rosie Bones on a lot of this stuff. Then Jeff kind of jumps in and plays some killer solos and stuff in the background. But so like I said, it that really bothered me. She kind of bothered me initially, but I kind of grown to like her. But like I said, I calling it a Jeff Beck album is a stretch, honestly. I think Shrine, the closer, is a gorgeous song. It's a beautiful song. That's one I've played many, many times, actually. But the rest of it, I just haven't listened to that much. All right. So, number 12, we are reaching back now, going back to the 70s here with Rough and Ready. This is the first record of sort of that second version of the Jeff Beck group. What year was this? This was 1971. And like I said, this is kind of they're still kind of doing some of that heavy blues rock stuff, but with the addition of Max Middleton, especially, who's going to be a key player in a lot of his '70s work. Um, there's a more kind of jazzy feel, jazz elements, sort of laying the groundwork for what's coming next. To me, there's just not that many. I mean, it's a 3-star record, and it's just sort of it's the classic example of a good record, but nothing really stands out. I mean, great playing. The singer on there, what's his name? Bob Tench. That guy doesn't have the distinctive voice of, say, a Rod Stewart. So to me, that's kind of a weakness. He's not bad. It's just doesn't stand out at all. And none of these songs really stand out to me. So that's just good. All right. Next, from 2003, we have Jeff. This is the third record in this sort of trilogy of records where he just made this stunning comeback. Uh, you're going to see I have the other two substantially higher. This there's still some good stuff on here, but with the third record, I guess some of the surprise and shock has worn off. So I should go ahead and say these three records were these they are kind of these really heavy kind of electronica records, but it's not just like kind of Jeff like the electronica and the Jeff Beck is kind of this dilettante who's kind of soloing over it. He really integrates his guitar sound into these records, and they are, I mean, just amazing. The songs, how when I said that he was doing some of his most innovative work later in his career, it's really these three records that he, I think that shows that just guitar sounds that I had never heard. You know, but like that to me, this is the least impressive of them. Although there's some good stuff on there. Plan B is good. Trouble Man, he just rips it on that. Um, Line Dancing with Monkeys, JB's Blues, some good stuff on there. There is kind of some vocalizing on here that I find kind of distracts and gets in the way too. So by far my least favorite of those three records. Okay, number 10, moving into 3.5 star territory here. We have a favorite of many people, There and Back. There and Back. From 1980, like I had said before, kind of this bridge record from that groundbreaking fusion work he was doing in the 70s and it's sort of bridging to the 80s. So you still have some of that fusion elements there. Jan Hammer is still on here. Uh, but it's some of that kind of 80s stuff is creeping in, and there's a lot more synthesizers and programming and stuff like that. Much more of that than on those classic fusion records. But there's still some real standout tracks on here. Star Cycle is awesome. It's basically this kind of duet between Jeff Beck and Jan Hammer. That song off and on stayed in his set, the rest of his life. You Never Know is pretty cool. Space Boogie is cool. The Pump is probably the highlight on here. That's a great slow burn, kind of slow build, great groove to it. That song got some attention because it was on the Risky Business soundtrack. So that song got kind of was a little popular. All right, number 9 from 2010, we have also 3.5 stars. We have Emotion and Commotion. Now, so this is the album, the studio album that followed that trio of kind of really hard electronica, real innovative records. Some of the album art looks a little similar, so you might think this is just a fourth record in that vein. And there's a song Hammerhead definitely fits in with that stuff. Hammerhead's great, but honestly, the rest of this record is a lot kind of quieter, more lyrical, more melodic, really kind of mellow, beautiful stuff though. Corpus Christi Carol, Never Alone is gorgeous. Uh, Over the Rainbow, just beautiful instrumental version of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. Nessun Dorma, Puccini, I think, right? The opera piece. He does a beautiful like dramatic version of that with an orchestra, and of course Jeff's his guitar playing is the vocal line in that gorgeous stuff. On this one, there's some guest vocalists that actually really are good. Joss Stone is on a couple of these songs. I Put a Spell on You, great version of that on there. Olivia Safe, I think, yeah. I'm not familiar with her. Imelda May, but yeah, there's some great vocals. Interesting, all female, but yeah, interesting vocalists on here. But this is a really pretty record, really is. So, like I said, 3.5 stars on that one. Okay, number 8. Moving to 1972 to the second of the two records in the second version of the Jeff Beck Group, and this is called Jeff Beck Group. And yeah, I like this one a bit more than the first one. This I don't know, it just has some more distinctive songs. Kind of same style, but there's a few songs that really do stand out to me. Ice Cream Cakes. Love ice cream cakes. And they sound tasty, but the song is great too. That's what I'm talking about with the sort of the really creative mind of his playing. Listen to that song before he even gets to the guitar solo, which is really cool. But even just the opening riffs that he's throwing in there are so cool. Just not many people play like that. I can't give back the love I feel for you. Beautiful instrumental. Going down, a great blues standard that probably most famous with Freddie King, right? But this is a killer version of that. Again, when Jeff launches into the guitar solo in there, he just starts that solo not like anyone else would start the solo, and it's just fantastic, it really is. All right, moving right along here. Uh, let's see. So four-star territory. 7 and 6 I can talk about together because at 7 I have Beckola from '69, and at 6 I have Truth from '68. The two Jeff Beck groups with that original lineup: Rod Stewart, Ron Wood. These are pretty revered. Heavy kind of blues rock from the late '60s. Uh, great stuff. We'll start with Actually, we'll start with Truth, even though it's ranked a little bit higher. This one, he starts off with Shapes of Things, which was a great Yardbirds tune of his, and I think it's real smart. He sort of reworks that into a sort of a heavier, more psychedelic version here with Rod Stewart on the vocals. But just great. Morning Dew. I love it when anyone covers that song. You Shook Me, and I Ain't Superstitious. Some blues standards that just shakes the foundations with those. Kind of a nice little acoustic Green Sleeves. It's out of nowhere on there. What else? What else? Yeah, so just some. Oh, Beck's Bolero. Beck, which had actually been a single with totally different lineup, but they threw it on here too. Beck's Bolero is interesting. You just look at the lineup. It's Jeff Beck and Jimmy Page on guitars, John Paul Jones on bass, and Keith Moon on drums. Now, if you imagine that group would stay together for a while. That one's a classic. That's amazing. This one's a little sloppier, but in some ways more fun. All shook up in Jailhouse Rock. These really almost garage band, but just stomping Elvis covers. I don't know how you say it. Plinth. I don't know. Water Down the Drain is clearly the highlight on here. That song is amazing. But yeah, what to me, these are great, but what holds them back from being quite as classic as say some of the Jimi Hendrix stuff at the times, Cream, is the songwriting. These guys don't have the songwriting that some of those other bands do. The playing is there, the musicianship is there, the creativity is there, but they don't have the songwriting. As you can see going through some of those songs, you can see that a lot of them, a lot of both of these records kind of depend on covers, right? So that's my only complaint. But Truth especially is kind of a classic. All right, number 5, 1989, uh, Guitar Shop. Now, I've talked about this already. First of all, one of my very favorite album covers of all time. It's great to fold out. You can see even more. Jeff Beck's two passions in life: the guitar and working on vintage cars. And so he brings them both together here in this great album cover. I've talked about this record before. This is with Terry Bozzio on drums and Tony Hymas on keyboards and bass. 1989. I saw him on this tour on a double bill with Steve Ray Vaughan. That was intense. But this is a fascinating record to me because it's one that I've thought about for years and years and years. I still can't decide whether I think it is a masterpiece. I have it 4 stars, but is a masterpiece or kind of a near miss. But it's a fascinating record. Big block that stayed in his set lists, really till the end. It's a great rocker. Where Were You is one of the most gorgeous piece of music you'll ever hear. I think Brian May of Queen talked about how that was the most beautiful guitar song he ever heard. It's stunning, kind of how he used a lot of harmonics on, and it's just gorgeous. I saw him do that live, and it's like, how does he do that? It's beautiful. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting. A lot of these songs, though, really did get more fleshed out, in live versions a little bit later too. So, all right, number 4, I have it 4.5 stars, like right there, and then number 3, I have it 5 stars. I can talk about these two together because this is where I have Who Else from 1990, and You Had It Coming from no, it's 1999. Sorry, and You Had It Coming from 2001. These, to me, these are really of a piece. Almost, I consider them kind of like a double album. But when this came out, I mean, it was a stunner because I mean, his '90s decade especially had been really scattershot, basically nothing. And then this hits like pretty much out of nowhere, and it's like this really experimental, like heavy electronica stuff, but Jeff really integrates his guitar into it, and it's just wow. And then he kind of follows it up with this, which is just more of it, and so yeah, I think these together, I, maybe my personal favorites, although 1 and 2 have to be 1 and 2, and we'll talk about those in a second. But yeah, I guess starting with this one, um, Space for the Papa and Angel. Space for the Papa is like 7.5 minutes. Angel 6.5 minutes. Those songs kind of bleed together. Just incredibly innovative. The guitar sounds he gets out of there, these jagged sounds in Space for the Papa, and then this beautiful, smooth, ethereal stuff in Angel. THX 138 just pounds, man. It's just awesome. I remember seeing I saw David Bowie on his final tour he did for Reality, and the music he was having played, on the system before he came out. He was playing this record. I remember I was with a couple buddies of mine, and my buddy was like, "What is that?" And it was this song THX 138. I was like, "That's Jeff Beck, man." But yeah, so just I think start to finish is pretty awesome. Really grows on you too the more you listen to it. This one, in some ways, has some moments of even like grittier and edgier stuff. Roy's Toy and Dirty Mind, those two songs, the riffs he has is all these percussive riffs. It's just fascinating. I've never heard someone get sounds like that out of the guitar. Yeah, and then Nadia, when I was telling you about his slide playing, Nadia, gorgeous slide playing. These two, I mean, for me, why Jeff Beck is so innovative to me is it can be found here. But you guys knew, most of you, what had to be in the 1 and the 2 slot. I have Wired from 1976 at 5 stars, and then of course Blow by Blow from 1975 in the 1 slot, 5 stars. I already mentioned these are jazz fusion classics, every bit as innovative and creative as Miles Davis and John McLaughlin and Mahavishnu Orchestra, all that stuff. Just I mean the playing will blow you away. He's got a killer band. This one was actually produced by George Martin, right? The Beatles producer. He has amazing. Max Middleton is key on here. The bass playing of Wilbur Bascom is incredible. Just, I mean, I don't know what to tell you other than you've got to listen to these and give them your utmost attention. His The whole band, but especially his guitar playing is just stunning. Well, yeah, on here, Lead Boots just starts off, you know, just right out of the gate. Come Dancing. I already told you about Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. I think probably his most controlled lyrical playing of his entire career. Blue Wind. This whole thing is great. This one's a little edgier, but yeah, maybe I have this at 1 because it came first. Yeah, I don't know, but Blow by Blow, of course, has Scatterbrain, that incredible speed he has on there. Because We've Ended as Lovers, beautiful cover of Stevie Wonder song, and of course the funky Thelonious, then moving into what may be his definitive tune. I don't know, Freeway Jam. It's just they ain't better than this stuff. It really doesn't. Well, all right, guys, I was trying to keep the time down on this. So that's Jeff Beck. Well, let's talk Jeff Beck. What do you guys think? What do you guys think of my rankings? Whatever. Let's just talk all things Jeff Beck in the comments. I want to hear it. Let's have great discussion. Yeah, and we'll see you next time on Amity Tracks. Hopefully, a little shorter video next time. But I had a lot to say with Jeff Beck. All right, we'll see you next time.